China is nowhere near as rich as you think. Sure, there are global megacities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, but these urban centres essentially form a band of prosperity along China's eastern coast. Most of the rest of the country is much poorer. The average Chinese worker in Shanghai earns around $1,000 a month, but look across to Gansu and the average drops to less than $250. China has an inequality problem, and it's not just between the rich and poor, but between the country's wealthy coastline and its often poverty-stricken interior. But why have China's coastal cities boomed when most of the interior has not? And why has the all-powerful Communist Party so far failed to address this massive inequality? In 1839, a group of British sailors stationed in Kowloon got drunk on local rice wine. They fell into an altercation with Lin Weiji, a local villager. They beat him to death. Outraged by this incident, the Chinese commissioner overseeing Kowloon demanded to put the British sailors on trial. Their commander, Captain Charles Elliot, refused, fearing the sailors' execution at the hands of the Chinese. Instead, he convened a British court aboard HMS Volage, a warship docked off the Chinese coast. The sailors received fines and sentences of hard labour to be served back in the UK. Understandably, the Chinese were furious. Events soon spiralled out of control, and within 6 weeks, Britain and China were at war.
More than 80% of all the people in China live on farms, and the average individual farmer's holding is less than 4 acres. This means that every foot of fertile earth must be cultivated carefully and intensively from dawn to dusk of every day.
For centuries prior to the 1800s, China had been closed economically to the outside world. With a large population, enough fertile land, and the resources needed to sustain and prosper, China had little need for external trade. But as Western countries developed, they began needing, or at least wanting, trade with China. The Kowloon incident led to the First Opium War, where Britain fought to expand trade with China, with the intent of importing opium and exporting tea, silks, and porcelain pottery. The First Opium War began nearly a century of foreign interference in China. Western nations began establishing trading posts along the Chinese coast. What were small villages soon boomed into major hubs for shipping and commerce. By the mid-20th century, China's coastal regions were becoming wealthy. But then the communists took power.
Peking at first appeared to be the same city I had known 20 years before when I first came to China as a young reporter. But I soon learned Peking was full of new sights and sounds. The parade was just a rehearsal for National Day. It is Communist China's leading holiday.
In 1959, Chairman Mao launched the Four Pests campaign, part of his Great Leap Forward, an ambitious plan to modernize China. The aim of the Four Pests campaign was to increase Chinese agricultural outputs by taking drastic measures to transform the country's natural resources. The campaign was unbelievably misguided. It aimed to eradicate rats, fleas, mosquitoes, and sparrows from China's countryside. It was all madness, but the most insane idea was trying to get rid of the sparrows. Sparrows were seen as a threat to grain stores. What became known as the Smash the Sparrows campaign literally saw millions of people going into fields and bashing pots and pans, scaring the sparrows and preventing them from nesting and laying eggs. China's sparrow population plummeted. The problem was that the sparrows are a key part of China's ecosystem and vital in preventing locusts. The results of the campaign? A massive locust outbreak, and the almost complete collapse of China's agricultural system, and a famine that killed an estimated 30 million people. In the 1950s, China was still a predominantly rural society. Moderate urbanization had occurred throughout the 19th and into the 20th century. However, the enormous scale of a famine resulting from Mao's disastrous Great Leap Forward resulted in a massive movement of people into the cities. China's major cities then, as today, lied along its coastline. Although international trade had all but halted following the communist takeover in the late 1940s, urban centres that had grown over the previous century, such as Beijing, Shanghai and Guangzhou, remained China's major urban centres. These were where people fled to.
The Cultural Revolution was not strictly cultural. It wasn't a struggle for power alone. It wasn't a civil war. Mostly, it was a war of words over the very nature of Chinese communism and its foreign and domestic policies. In a most extraordinary political act, Mao launched an attack on his own party establishment. It was as if an American president had bypassed his party, his cabinet, and Congress, and gone directly to the people, led by millions of students, the Red Guards.
In 1968, a group of Red Guards stormed Peking University. The Red Guards were bands of youths highly loyal to Chairman Mao, who as part of the Cultural Revolution had been unleashed to prop up his position within the Communist Party, and to terrorize anyone who might oppose his rule. At Peking University, the Red Guards found Deng Pufang, the son of the then exiled former Communist Party Secretary General Deng Xiaoping. What happened next is disputed. Deng Pufang was either thrown or forced to jump from a three-story window. The fall left him paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. Deng Xiaoping never openly spoke about the impact of the Red Guards or Mao's Cultural Revolution on himself or his family. All we know for certain is that when he rose to power following Mao's death, he almost completely dismantled Mao's economic legacy.
I think a situation which I can really summarize in the following kind of way, that capital right now is too big to fail. We cannot imagine a situation where we would shut down the flow of capital.
When Deng Xiaoping assumed power in China in 1979, the nation was on its knees. Nearly 600 million Chinese people lived in poverty. The country had experienced decades of political turmoil and violence during the Mao era. Deng could see clearly that Mao's economic policies had failed. He took drastic action, and as a result, transformed China's economy forever. Deng Xiaoping established a series of special economic zones in 1981. Essentially, these were areas where capitalism could flourish, whilst the rest of the country remained under tight communist economic policies. But where to establish these special economic zones? Deng looked to China's trading past, as well as to its urban centres with their large workforces. Special economic zones were first established in Shenzhen, Shantou and Xiamen. By 1990, China's experiment in capitalism had grown, with 2 more special economic zones in the coastal cities of Shanghai and Hainan. Deng's plan worked. Capitalism did flourish in these coastal enclaves. However, although Deng's experiment in capitalism succeeded, it would take the complete transformation of China's economy for full regional inequality to set in.
It took China 15 years to cultivate WTO, and now it hopes to reap the economic returns. China is now an official member of the global trading body. Membership carries with it the obligation to allow foreign competition in most of its markets.
On the 11th of November 2001, representatives from the trade ministries of 142 nations gathered in the Gulf state of Qatar. The main item on their agenda was to ratify China's entry to the World Trade Organization. Negotiations had dragged on for 15 years. China's ascendancy to the WTO meant the world's most populous nation, which had for decades been almost entirely closed to the global economic system, could now move to become fully integrated in the international trading order. The limited experiment in capitalism started by Deng in the 1980s soon transformed China's economy. The country's huge population, low wages and limited regulation meant that China was ideal for manufacturing. This resulted in an economy highly focused on exports. To reduce costs further, especially in transportation, Chinese and international firms based their manufacturing hubs along the coast. especially in the major cities. By the turn of the millennium, China's urban centers had become the mega global cities we know today. However, it would take just one single event to show China and the world just how left behind the rest of the country had become.
At the Dongqi High School, Monday afternoon's Chinese literature lesson is still on the blackboard. Here, 2 umbrellas are left on the rack. But the school itself has gone. 4 floors of classrooms collapsed in the earthquake. Hundreds of children who'd just begun their afternoon studies are now trapped in this rubble.
On the 12th of May 2008, 1,700 children were killed in the Chinese city of Mianyang when their school building collapsed. In fact, on that day, 5,600 children would die in schools across the central Chinese province of Sichuan. Central China had been hit by a magnitude 8 earthquake, one of the strongest ever recorded. Nearly 70,000 people died, many in their homes and offices, but it was the death of the children who had been attending poorly built government schools that truly shocked the nation. China's economic reforms and its almost complete abandonment of communism resulted in massive economic growth in the coastal cities. However, China's huge rural interior remains neglected. The economic boom along the coast fed a cycle of increased government investment and better infrastructure, which in turn fueled further economic growth in major cities. China's interior, on the other hand, became neglected as government finance, as well as businesses and talent, migrated to the cities. The geography of rural China, often mountainous and with few navigable rivers, may have meant it had always been economically worse off than the better connected coastal settlements. However, it still took nearly 2 centuries of foreign involvement, disastrous communist policies, limited experiments in capitalism, and then the full-blown transformation of China's economy towards global trade and exports for the full extent of the country's regional inequality to become fully apparent.
我们的大会，这一次第9次代表大会能够开得好，能够开展一个团结的大会。